Session of the Schertz City Council. First item on the agenda is opening prayer and pledge of allegiance to the flag. Please rise while Councilmember Davis leads us in the prayer and the pledge.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today. Thank you for providing for our health and our friendship, and thank you for the opportunity to serve you and our community. As we offer this prayer tonight, I pray for our city officials in this council and ask that you grant them wisdom to guide their decisions, instill the desire to listen with understanding and goodwill, and act in your name to serve our community. In your name I pray, amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
First item on our agenda is employee recognition, EMS.
Mayor Pro Tem, we're going to have to do that the next time he was unavailable.
Okay. Utility billing. Going once. How about our police department?
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, staff. I want to introduce you to the newest code enforcement officer with the police department. Is Jerry Lee Perez. Jerry was born in Plainview, Texas, where he spent 24 years. He had a passion for baseball and started the varsity team his freshman year, lettered all 4 years. He also lettered in football for 3 of the years. Pretty close after high school, Jerry started his career at the Walmart Distribution Center in Plainview, Texas. He worked there for 6 years before transferring out to the Walmart Sam's Incorporated here in San Antonio, Texas. He spent the next 25 years there working at various positions throughout the company. The move to San Antonio was a great one for Jerry because he met the love of his life, Patricia, here. They've now been happily married for 23 years. They have 2 children, Kayla, who's 22 and is attending college in Florida, and Jeremy's 19 and attends college here locally. After 31 years with Walmart Sam's, Jerry decided it was time for a career change, and he said that the code enforcement has always intrigued him. He applied hoping to start his next chapter with the city of Schertz. Jerry has been with us for 2 weeks now so far and is telling us he's definitely enjoying the new position and all the staff and residents that he's met so far. I can tell you that it's for the police department side and the city of Schertz, this is a great pick that we have here. His work ethic is awesome. Just in the 2 weeks we've seen it, he's picked up so much. He's out doing everything that we would want him to do as well as the residents. Jerry enjoys going to the movies with his wife, and he also enjoys having family and friends over for cookouts and gatherings. So again, Jerry Lee Perez.
Well, welcome to the city.
Thank you very much.
We don't usually make it mandatory, but if you'd like to say something, now's your opportunity.
The only thing I like to say is thank you, and I'm glad to be here and look forward to my future career here with Schertz.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Public Works.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, Mr. James. I'd like to introduce Chance Sears. He started working with us July 23rd, and he is enjoying streets and learning everything there is about public works. Chance was born in Gary, Houston, and lived there till he was 12 years old. He attended the Dickinson Elementary School and then moved to San Antonio in 2015 and graduated high school in 2016 from East Central. Chance has a girlfriend named Alyssa Cantu. They have been together for a year, and his family is still living here in San Antonio. Chance enjoys working on vehicles, going dancing with his girlfriend, and fishing when time allows.
Awesome. Once again, if you'd like to say something, the mic's yours.
It's very nice to meet all y'all. I'd like to thank y'all for this opportunity, and I look forward to the future here.
Excellent.
This is Dion McAfee. He is our new drainage employee. Again, Dion is looking forward to learning everything about public works and everything in drainage. Dion was born in San Antonio, Texas, then moved on to Louisiana, where he went to Kerr Elementary. From there, he went to Russian Middle School, then on to Bossier, Louisiana, then moved to Colorado and graduated from Sand Creek High School in 2008. Dion was living in Cibolo with his girlfriend for the last 7 years, and they have a 4-year-old boy named Dion Jr. Dion enjoys spending time with family, playing basketball, and working around the house. It's Dion. Okay.
Your opportunity if you'd like to say hi.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Awesome.
Nice to see everyone, and I'm looking forward to working for the city, and thanks for the opportunity.
Glad to have you. Okay, Doug, you sure nobody else is here?
That's it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, and finally, inspections.
Good evening, Council. I'd like to introduce the newest building inspector, Stephen James Roberts. He has a wife, Amy, 4 daughters, Faith, 17, Hope, 13, Destiny, 10, Love, 9. Originally from Washington State, he grew up around Fort Worth, graduated from Claiborne High School. He moved to Louisiana, attended the fire academy at LSU, and was a firefighter for 9 years. Came back to Texas after he and his family were supposed to move to Florida. Apparently the compass got finally pointed in the right direction and ended up here. His hobbies are being with his family, number 1, and working out with the gym, number 2.
Thank you for the opportunity to come to Schertz. Here I know there's a lot of people that applied for my position, and I feel grateful and honored to be picked. So I do my best for y'all.
Excellent. Welcome on board. Okay, I would like to recognize Boy Scout Tyler Peak from Troop 51. He's working on his citizenship in the community merit badge. So thank you for spending some time with us. Next item on the agenda is presentation, Schertz Q and the 60th anniversary.
Thinking. Maybe not. Thank you, sir. All right. You're out there. There we go. Took a couple of minutes. All right. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, Mr. James. We are going to share a little bit of information about the upcoming, closely on the heels of our Jubilee, the little rained out event that we had, but a little bit of information about our Schertz Q event and how we're going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the City of Schertz's incorporation. All right, so celebrating 60 years. Nice to have a chance to celebrate the incorporation of the city and tell a little bit about our history, bring us up to date on what's going on now. a family-friendly event. Certainly that's our key goal, is making sure that the events that we're hosting are going to be family-friendly, any ages from 1 to 92. It'll be 2 days or day and a half. Friday evening, September the 14th, we'll do a 6 to 10 p.m. And then on Saturday, all day long, starting about 10 o'clock that morning, running until about 9 o'clock that evening. So a lot of activities scheduled for the 2 days as we celebrate. Okay? And, of course, on our beautiful Pickerel Park.
So this is essentially, we really wanted to be able to combine the 60th anniversary with Schertz Q, so we really wanted to make it big. We wanted to make sure we had lots of opportunities for family-friendly events. So we're going to start off on Friday. We're going to have some life-size yard games, so we can kind of invite some families over to this area where we would love to be able to serve cupcakes. And that way we are celebrating that anniversary there. We're going to have refreshments there that are going to be free. That will be root beer, iced tea, coffee. I say root beer because BJ's Brewhouse is making it homemade for us, and we're very excited about that. We're going to have a very unique element out there that's going to be pretty new. It's called Sound Cream Airstream. If you've been out to the Pearl, you've seen it. It provides a really great atmosphere. We're expecting a lot of families to gather, enjoy music in the park, enjoy those games, enjoy those cupcakes. We'll also have the carnival going on, and that'll be on Friday. And then, did you want to go over the Saturdays?
Then carrying over the anniversary for the city carries into the Saturday. So beginning about 10 o'clock that morning, a large tent in the middle of the park where we'll have our Settlers Corner. This is our opportunity to work with the Historical Commission. Mr. Wirtz and his team are going to be out there and be part of it and be able to share some information about the history of Schertz. A couple other folks are going to be there answering any questions that folks may have, visitors may have about the city and about its history. Then we'll also be doing a little cake walk, a cupcake walk, taking something a little bit back from some school days as well. And then some inflatables, some different games and activities that the kids are going to be able to do, pony rides and a petting zoo as well too. All of this will be taking place alongside the barbecue competition. So Saturday, the barbecue cook-off, we're anticipating about 80 teams are going to compete in that cook-off. We will have some food, craft, and business vendors out there as well. The family zone, and another time that the families can come out, and it's going to be activities for all ages as well. That Kids Q competition, this will be the second year that we're going to have this portion of it, so some registrations and letting the kids be able to compete as the adults do. Their product will be judged as well, just like the adults do, and there are awards that will be presented to them also. Okay? And then 2 days of carnival as well that we'll have. Okay? Lots to celebrate as we go for 60 years.
Any questions from the council?
I did have an opportunity to see that sound screen. That was pretty cool. I saw that a few weeks ago down at the Pearl. That is a great addition. Thank you. And you guys did a great job tag teaming as well. Good job.
Just one question. We will have fireworks, right?
We are going to have fireworks,
It's
yes,
going to be a grand finale, like 15 minutes of a grand finale.
Unfortunately, with our rain out of Jubilee, yes, we're moving the fireworks, so that'll culminate the evening on Saturday. Fireworks about 8:15.
Be looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Next item on the agenda is city events and announcements. Announcements of upcoming city events. Mr. James or Ms. Gonzalez?
I have it this evening.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, so first on this week, Thursday, August 9th, we have the Northeast Partnership meeting. It's at 11:30 at the Olympia Hills Golf and Conference Center. Next Tuesday, August 14th, we'll be back in the chambers for a regular city council meeting at 6 p.m. Our community budget meetings kick off next week. There's going to be 3 of them. The first will take place on Thursday, August 16th, and it will be held at Corbett Middle School at 6:30 p.m. The second of the community budget meetings will be on Wednesday, August 22nd at the Community Center North at 6:30 as well. On the 23rd, the next day, the final community budget meeting will be at Schertz United Methodist Church, and again at 6:30 p.m. So we encourage everyone to come out and get an overview about what staff is presenting for the budget this year. And then on Tuesday, August 28th, will be a regular city council meeting here in the chambers. And then also to mention that we're going to be having the election on November 6th, and sorry, I'm trying to read the notes here. If you're interested in applying or becoming candidate to file, it started on the 20th of August, or you have to. Okay, let me just start over on this. Okay, so any candidate desiring to have his or her name on the ballot should file an application with the city secretary's office no later than Monday, August 20th. That's the deadline by 5 p.m. Any questions or any information can be found on the city's website or to contact the city secretary. Thank you.
Thank you. Announcements and recognition by our acting city manager, Mr. James.
Sure. I keep kind of forgetting this going forward, but I want to try to make sure I announce to folks who may be watching online or in the audience some of the things we don't cover that we give council written updates. So we've got a number of those. One is we're doing typically the first meeting of the month, an update on our large capital improvement projects. This time, based on some council feedback, we included an update on the FM 1103 and FM 1518 projects. We've had some issues with utility billing in terms of getting bills out, in terms of reading meters. There's a little bit of how we're going to handle that going forward, and then we should have, again, a contract come forward to council in a few weeks on purchasing the new meters, which will hopefully sort of alleviate some of that. The Schertz Economic Development Corporation second quarter update. And then lastly, while I know everyone enjoyed James Walter's presentation last meeting on the investment report, rather than have him reprise that with the financial report, there's the written update on the quarterly financial report. And he's done that a few times now, so I think folks understand how to read that. But certainly if there's a citizen who looks that up, has questions, call the city's finance department. They're happy to walk you through it.
And finally, announcements and recognition by the mayor, or in this case, the mayor pro tem, and I have none. Next item on the agenda is hearing of residents. And first individual signed up is Mr. Mark Allen. If you could, please state your name and address.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Mark Allen. I live at 308 Antrim. And the reason why I came out tonight is to find out if there is a future agenda item to talk about widening Wiederstein Road and Old Wiederstein Road. There's been a flurry of questions on social media recently about people that are, wanting to find out some more information about what's being planned right now. And I just wanted to, to see if that's something that we could put on a future agenda, or if it's already scheduled for a future agenda. Just wanted to clear the air and see if we could, have a presentation by the city and find out, separate from facts from fiction, and see what's, what's being planned and how quickly we can see some improvements on those roads. Do you have an answer for me?
Well, yeah, we're allowed to give factual responses, and Mr. James is demanding to know at the moment.
We've been in discussions with City of Cibolo that we hope to have the ILA for an agreement to work together to get going on those improvements at the next meeting. Okay. So again, barring some sort of crisis catastrophe in my office tomorrow morning, I think we'll hit that deadline. I need to get that over to Bob Herrera in Cibolo tomorrow as well after working with the attorney.
Okay, and so I guess that would go to Mr. Herrera, and then at that point, would that be something you would put on an agenda to talk about?
Yeah, we've generally discussed, about 6 weeks ago, we had discussion about the framework of a deal, and it's just a matter of crafting that agreement, me finishing up, getting it to the city attorney review, getting it to Mr. Herrera, and then sticking it on an agenda.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the response.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Brent Bolter.
Brent Bolter, 2633 Cloverbrook Lane. Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, City Manager. Okay, good. We're good. Yes, no. Now, I'm in the sweet spot. Okay, great. So, at the last City Council meeting, there was an agenda item, discussion in closed session, relative to was a city council member in violation of your code of ethics. Vote was taken, came out, and the answer was no. Now, this matter related to the night that we had city council meeting where names were put forward to be put on committees, boards, right? So it was related to that situation. So in light of the fact that you all voted that there was no violation that evening in the discussions, what I want to bring up is I think there needs to be a change in the procedure relative to that specific situation where people have been nominated by the interview committee to be on a commission or a board. So when that item becomes before city council, if the nature of the situation is such that council members are going to be able to speak in opposition to an individual that's been put forward, which is what transpired that night, then I think what is lacking is the opportunity for the individual in question to come forward before council and respond to anything that was brought up. Right now, the way it stands, it's a very one-sided situation, which I don't think is fair for the person that's been nominated to sit on the commission or on the board. It's a one-way discussion, and the individual doesn't have a chance to come up here and respond to what has been said. So whatever rules need to be changed, however the chair is able to conduct it such prior to a vote being taken, that whoever is under discussion has an opportunity to come up to the mic and state the case from their perspective before a vote is taken. Like I said, based on what happened that night, based on the vote that was taken at the last council meeting, we've set up a one-sided situation. I don't think that's fair to the person that's been nominated. Okay, so in the United States of America, in our justice system, even a condemned individual has a right to speak before sentence is passed. That night, they didn't get to speak, vote was taken, and sentence was passed. I just don't think that's fair. So in fairness, if that's the rules going forward, that somebody on council gets to speak in reference to a person that's been nominated and say, here's the reasons why I don't support that individual. I think before a vote is taken, it's only fair that that individual has a right to come up here and speak and say, here's my reaction or my addressing whatever statements that have been made. I think that's fair. I think that's equitable. Right now, that can't happen. So going forward, the next time that comes up, I think that should be put in place. Just my suggestion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And finally, Allison Hayward.
Allison Hayward, 2628 Hansel Heights. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, Acting City Manager, and City Attorney and staff. I just wanted to come here tonight to thank you for thank you to let the residents know who are watching and will be watching this later to know about the hard work that you do in planning the city budget. Despite having full-time jobs, most of you spent your work day at the budget retreat discussing, debating, and considering next year's budget and the 4 years after that to move the city forward. I'm thankful that you allow concerned citizens who want to take the time and attend and be part of the process to see and hear the competing options and see the detailed background information behind the decisions. I want to attest that those decisions are not made willy-nilly. I think that citizens should look forward to, and importantly, attending the Councils on the Go on the community budget meeting. I'll be there, and I just wanted to say again, thank you for your commitment and your transparency in the process.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, a workshop. We have a workshop discussion regarding amending and revising the solicitation ordinance. Mr. Waite. And Chief Hansen, or Assistant Chiefs. Okay, I'll back up to it after the presentation. Go ahead, Chief.
Mayor Pro Tem, Council, good evening. I want to take a bit of time this evening to talk about our current ordinance that's in place for soliciting and peddling. It's getting a little dated, and there's a few topics that we'd like to address and provide recommendations on to the Council for a future update. We want to discuss some of the hours of soliciting, entry upon premises or private property, what property owners' rights are, soliciting notices, age requirements, soliciting in the roadway, some definitions, and our permitting process. Now, a vast majority of our current ordinance hasn't been touched since 2003. And in the past 12 months, we've had approximately 162 calls for service. A lot of this is solicitors in our neighborhoods. If you're at 35 and 3009 anytime on the weekends, you'll see quite a few people standing up there soliciting from our citizens and motorists. Now, with the current ordinance, we feel there's a need to define some of the terms as we make recommendations for changes. We wanted to talk about aggressive manner, our automated teller facilities, a bank, what a canvasser is, conspicuously displayed permits, handbill flyer, panhandling, our parking meter station, pedal, public area, charitable organization, check cashing business, and this all together as we go through the ordinance here. Now, first, the hours of soliciting, and this is legally too restrictive is the way it's written right now. Currently, soliciting is prohibited from 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. and all day on Sundays. We've discussed this with our city attorneys. Like I said, it is legally restrictive, and we want to provide y'all with at least some options, some talking points to come up with something that's a little bit, I guess, better to meet the legal needs and not being too restrictive. You know, it's really open. Like I said, we're just going to offer some suggestions, 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., maybe continuing on with no Sundays soliciting, even discussions, do we limit soliciting after dark? Do we want people showing up at people's houses at nighttime? But, some options that we can discuss as we go along. Currently, there are no restrictions on where solicitors may enter a residential or private property. For example, we've had complaints from residents where solicitors actually come into their garage, come around the side of their house to a fence. We want to look at limiting that to just the primary entrance of the property. In other words, a front door. People shouldn't have to be concerned with strangers walking in the garage or walking inside the house. We want to spell out the property owner's rights to have solicitors cease their actions, or the right to remove them from their property. For example, you have your H-E-B, your Lowe's, your Walmart, have people soliciting there. While they may not want to do a criminal trespass warning and remove them from the property, but they want them to cease their action of soliciting, this would address that issue. And essentially making it unlawful for them to continue to solicit once they've been advised by the property owner to leave or to stop soliciting. Gated communities, that's somewhere we've also had some complaints. People come home, they drive through the gate, somebody follows them through, and that has brought us some complaints from the property owners not wanting solicitors in the neighborhood. This would allow the HOA or the governing body over that neighborhood, that gated community, to post no soliciting signage so they could address it for the whole neighborhood if they chose to. Current ordinance states that any person may request a no solicitation notice in the form established and issued by the city. We do not issue these notices, so we want to remove that. Current ordinance prohibits persons under the age of 16 from soliciting unless accompanied by a person 18 years of age or older. We will recommend some changes in the terminology. Just persons under the age of 18 must have a sponsoring adult to obtain a soliciting permit on their behalf, and also that if there's a minor, a responsible adult is with them while they're out in the neighborhoods or at the businesses soliciting. Now, soliciting in the roadways has become a problem. We get a lot of calls. We talked about 35 and 3009. A lot of times you see them on the weekends. People are in and out of traffic. The state has enacted a law where they pretty much prohibit anything in the roadway. So they may not stand in the roadway to solicit a ride, contribution, employment, or business from an occupant of a vehicle. The only exception to that would be they may stand to solicit a charitable contribution if authorized to do so by the local authority, being the city. Now, the state defines the roadway as a shoulder, the median, the curbs, the safety zones, the sidewalks, and the utility easements. So they've pretty well covered it all. Now, for the sake of the charitable contribution, if it's authorized by the local authority or the city having jurisdiction of the roadway, that can take place. It is allowed by the city if they choose to do so. But we also want to define the charitable contribution, meaning an organization is defined by the standards of the IRS and what a charitable organization is. Now, if the city decides that they're going to allow a organization to solicit in the roadway, they must be employees or agents of the local authority, in other words, of the city. So the way the state law is written, it's not open to everybody, but just agents of the city. And if a person seeking authorization to solicit in the roadway, they must file an application with the city not later than the 11th day before the date of solicitation. This is all state law that's currently in place. And it does not prohibit the city from requiring a permit. Now, our recommendation is to follow state law. And our city ordinance echo what the state has already put in place. Now, there are some exemptions. The exemptions revolve around actually people approaching vehicles. Now, our sign twirlers, our Statue of Liberty person at tax time, they're okay because they're not making contact with motorists. They're not soliciting funds. They're simply advertising. So they would not be affected. Okay, getting to some of our offenses. We want to address aggressive panhandling and address where it would be prohibited, which is pretty much any place in the public where the public is considered vulnerable or anywhere panhandling would interfere with the safe and orderly movement of traffic. When we talk about locations where people are vulnerable, we're talking about with banks, ATM machines, cash checking locations. It could even mean the parking lots, entrance, exits of restaurants. Once again, these are just talking points. Street right away from across from grocery stores. Once again, it's where do we think, as an organization, where our community is most vulnerable. All right, permitting. This is where we really have the opportunity to see who's going in our community and wanting to solicit. It gives us an opportunity to vet them prior to letting them go into our neighborhoods and approach our business owners. Our recommendation as part of the permitting process is to obtain a photocopy of their driver's license or state ID. If there is a commercial organization they're working for, we want to know who their chief operating officer is or their immediate supervisor. We've had scenarios where somebody comes in and gets a permit for an organization, they go out in the community, get a complaint, and we're looking for a supervisor to help us rectify it. So we want to make sure we include that in ordinance. A full list of goods and services to be rendered. And the important one is a copy of the sales agreement and contract that complies with the Texas Business and Commerce Code. There are cancellation clauses that the state is putting in place to help protect the consumer. We want to make sure that our citizens have that same right. We'd like to have a description of the vehicle should we get a call from a concerned citizen. At least we would have it documented, not only who was out there, what vehicle they're going to be driving through the neighborhoods. Criminal history. You'd be surprised some of the things we see with some of our applicants. We've had violent felons come in, looking soliciting neighborhoods, sex offenders. And this is something we'd like to address in ordinance. We want to address things such as those that are convicted of sex crimes, registered sex offenders, those who have been convicted of fraud, theft, assaults, or any kind of violent crime. And another protection for our citizens is a performance bond. Current ordinance requires that they have a performance bond if they intend to accept payment or deposit in advance of final delivery of whatever service or product they're selling, and that's the amount of $1,000. Well, if you're doing an $8,000, $9,000 purchase, the $1,000 performance bond isn't going to go far. So we want to reword that where the bond dollar amount exceeds the amount of service or product the value involved. A lot of the calls we get in the neighborhoods are for solicitors. There's no way to tell if they've been vetted. So we'd like to recommend going to a worn ID, whether it's on a lanyard, but something that's visible for our citizens to see. So when they show up, they know that that solicitor has been vetted through our department. That's something we could share to the community so they know what to look for.
Yeah, Chief, thanks so much. Really interesting information. Just one thing, a little bit of oversight on my part. We had one more hearing a resident that I admitted, and I don't know how many questions we have on the council. It may go on for a while. So I'd ask you please, make yourself comfortable, and I'll back up and we'll do a hearing of the residents, okay. And then we'll open it up for council discussion. It shouldn't take long. Okay. I apologize. One individual was left on a hearing of residents, Miss Janet Barnell.
Janet Barnett, 10650 Boney Drive, Schertz, Texas, 78154. I'm back. I don't know if y'all remember me. I was here a few weeks ago. I'd like to thank you all for...
Ma'am, you have to, it doesn't have a very wide...
Oh, okay. I want to look around and I can't. All right. I'm back. Yes, I was here a few weeks ago about our property. And this is where we live, 25 acres. This is Graytown, and this is Boney. Okay. The reason I came back is because 2 weeks ago I went and had a tax protest hearing in Wilson County. And my father left us 10 acres with his homestead home on it and 100 acres across the road. And I'm the protester. I go every year. And so we protested that 10 acres to whatever we can. The house is dilapidated. It's falling down. And we don't farm or run cattle on the 10 acres. So that the man was so nice to me. He said, well, Miss Barnett, I can do one thing for you. And I'll just say this is the 10 acres. He said, right here, there's a little bit of water coming into your property. Is that correct? And yeah, I said, it's a little flood zone, he said. So he says, I can take off 20% off your property. So going back to my property here, Graytown Road, 25 acres. We raised our family here, 5 children. And in back of the property were the Swanses, and this was their homestead. And they had a tank. And we never did anything with this fence to speak of, because this tank had a great big 10 to 12 foot tall dam. And all this was uphill. And all this was farmed in hay. And so was all this. And this was our floodplain. And you can see the blue, yes, came across the floodplain. And you can see the blue came down from the hill. When they built Laurel Ridge, we had no problem. Everything was fine. This area back here had never been flooded. I'd say it's 3 to 4 acres. Never in our whole 25 years, almost 30 at that time. The tank was there. The floodplain was there. Everything was fine. Laurel Ridge was up here. Okay? So life was good. And we have a tank and we have cattle because we have to have open space to afford Schertz taxes with our homestead. But they kept coming. And I don't know if she's going to focus. This won't go up as high. Our property, once again, is down here where my finger is. But, oh boy, look at all those houses, right? They demolished the tank with the dam. There's a cul-de-sac with a drainage ditch pointing right to the corner of this property, which was never wet, ever. All the water comes downhill. This tank that was there used to catch all the water for that family of 9, because Schertz finally gave us water, but we had no water 40 years ago. That was all the water that was pumped up to their house originally. All that water that they had going to that tank is coming down. This cul-de-sac was built. He built a culvert that goes down there and onto this whatever drainage is here, which I assumed, because when I came to church about 2 years ago, somebody in water, I talked to him, assured me I'd never received more water or velocity of water than I originally ever did. I assumed. So when I saw this culvert being built, or whatever it is, in this tank, and this was still no houses, which they're trying to build now, I assumed that this water was going to go to this tank, and they were going to assure me that the velocity and volume would stay the same. Not true. So I'll get about 3 times as much water as I've ever gotten, and I think this map shows it better, from all this that used to be land that was farmed, and hay and cattle. And I'm here because I brought my granddaughter. That's the other reason I came. I opened the Schertz magazine, and there was a council meeting, and I thought, I want my granddaughter to know that I fought for this land, because we're willing it to them. My 5 children, she's the oldest of 6 grandchildren. I want her to know that government is for the people and by the people, and that you can come talk to people and they will help you in your government. And we don't have kids here. They're on their iPads or they're playing their games. But this is where the kids need to be, and they need to know that they have a voice. So that's why I'm here, and I really would like some help with this. You know, we really don't have a lot of money for a lawyer, but I do know that when he built a dam here across this flat and diverted the water here onto our property, and it goes here to where that blue line was, it does meet it, but it wets and drains on all this property, and it used to be below our fence line. Now it's above, and all this is pouring up here. And a lawyer had told us that is illegal. And I think this is immoral. But thank you so much. I hope she remembers Granny was there to fight for her one time.
I'm sure she's very proud of her granny. And ma'am, Miss Burnett, I'll let Mr. James
Make sure Dudley Waite gets a copy of your email and phone number, and we'll see if we can get you in this week to sit down and kind of walk you through, make sure we understand it a little better and you understand.
Well, yeah, this is tough, and it's just a map, especially when you've lived there 40 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you,
Yes, ma'am.
James.
Thank you. We'll see if we can get your questions addressed. Okay, Chief, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, sometimes I'm getting old and my bifocals get in the way of what I'm looking at. So, solicitation.
Yes, sir.
Hey, by the way, is campaign season coming up? Is handing out a campaign flyer considered solicitation?
No.
No. Gee. Okay. That was the only question I had. I'll open it up to the rest of the council. Any issues that need to be addressed? Councilmember Davis.
Chief, do we anticipate having any kind of specific verbiage or waivers or procedures for our youth groups and schools that go out and do their fundraising things? You know, the way it was originally, portrayed in there, and we talked about someone under 16 being accompanied by adult. We're not really thinking about requiring a permit or having a problem with our local friendly Girl Scout troop, because I've got to get my cookie fix, and I don't really have a problem with them knocking on my door.
No, we had that discussion, especially about the Girl Scout cookies. We have some recommendations on age. We look to address some of the issues when we have people from out of town and out of state who bring just van loads of kids in and dump them in the neighborhood without permitting. There is little oversight. We could probably look at some terminology to address some of the local Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, your BBYA, Clemens football groups. But sure, we could absolutely look at some verbiage there.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome back.
Yes, thank you, sir. I do have a question. Can you require a deposit on the lanyard and a specific time for it to be returned? And let me explain why. If you give them that lanyard and they walk off and they make a copy of it, and that permit can expire at that time or over a period of time, what if they take that lanyard, make the copy, and they come back whenever they want to, or they go doctor it with when you look at documentation now, people in the printers that we have, people can change all types of information. So would you require a deposit on the lanyard to be refunded when the lanyard is brought back at a certain time?
That's a very valid point. I have seen that in the past where permits have been copied.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good idea. We can probably incorporate.
So just another thing. I've suffered quite a few times from people knocking on the door, and it doesn't bother me, but what I'm noticing is Mr. Davis brought up the van drop-offs. In our community, we will have a white, nondescript 15-passenger van drop-off. These are young adults with backpacks, and they will just ask as many questions as they can. They won't walk away from the door. They'll hit the Ring doorbell over and over. If they hear the puppies barking, they'll just keep going. I do believe it's intrusive to have someone walk into your backyard when you're barbecuing, or if they walk into your garage, that's a whole different ballgame. What kind of action can you take to get them out of your garage? That's your personal private property.
That is, absolutely. And something that's currently in the ordinance, we didn't talk because we weren't going to change it, but no soliciting signage on the front doors. It's addressed in the ordinance, which is why, we talk about the garage. We want them to go to the front door for that reason. So if they're going to the primary entrance of the property and you have the signage, that's their cue to turn around and walk away. A lot of the van loads, those are the ones that we catch that just don't come in and get permits. I don't recall ever seeing a application that said, I have a van. So a lot of those, I can't even recall any of them getting permits.
In that van load, does everyone in that van need a permit?
Yes.
Not just one permit for 15 people?
Correct. Every single individual has to be vetted.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments? So, Chief, what is it you'd like us to do moving forward?
We just want to bring some recommendations on what we're looking at to council, start the discussion as we move forward to make changes. We have a current red line copy of the ordinance that we can provide. And as we go along, we'll just continue to beat it up until we think is right.
Okay, and for residents who are being pestered by solicitors, is there a hotline they can call?
Yes, it'll be our primary PD number. And, of course, if it's emergency, 911.
911.
Find them in the garage.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, apologize. Chief, did one of the items that you provided a few options because we need to, for legal reasons, make a change on the hours of solicitation. Yes. Did the police department have a preference between the 3 different options listed on slide 7, or are you looking for direction from council on that? If you're looking for direction, it may be helpful if council has a preference one way or the other so we can slot that in.
I would probably defer to city attorney first to see what would be considered too legally restrictive or not. Then maybe provide some options from there.
Just to clarify too, the one thing we do know is 9 p.m. is legal. You can set it at 9 p.m. That's the latest time that's in a case that's on record. So.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, workshop presentation by our city attorney regarding initial framework of social media for council members. Mr. Santee.
This is a long time coming.
All right, good. Dan Santee, Denton Navarro. This is, I think, the 3rd time that we've had a discussion on social media. I'm not going to. It's not going to be exactly, I guess, as it's stated on the agenda. And I'll tell you. Let me recap first, and it'll kind of be evident why. So, where we left off our discussion on social media as it pertains to the city council is that on a few points. Number one, we talked about how just like that any use of your private email accounts, just like doing that, any use of your private email accounts for public business, that can be requested through the Public Information Act. Y'all familiar with that? I know you've had to deal with that. I know we've gathered emails from you for that purpose. And we talked about the fact that social media posts as well are subject to the Public Information Act, and that's kind of one of the newer developments when we started this conversation over a year ago. And once requested, any of those postings have to be turned in just like your emails were. And so that's one of the things I want to remind you that we talked about already. Also, the only authorized online form is as established through Chapter 551, which is the Open Meetings Act. You do not have that established for the City of Schertz. You have your City of Schertz website, you have your City of Schertz official social media platforms, but we don't have the one that complies with the Open Meetings Act, and there's been no inclination that I've heard from the council or the staff to go to that type of online message board. That's the one, if you recall, I think Charlie spoke to you about it, where that is the one recognized forum where council members can actually host and engage with each other on that particular platform. And I don't personally have any cities that I represent that have gone to that process. There's probably some out there, but that's why it's mentioned, though, because that's the only one that the Attorney General recognizes as far as online message boards where it complies with the Open Meetings Act. And you don't have to worry about quorum issues, because I know that was part of our discussion in previous times we've discussed this, as well as the idea about different council members when you get in those online discussions if there's any kind of a quorum problem. So only the City Council, as we've stated before, can govern the City Council's social media activity unless the Attorney General gets involved. And so this council has not brought forward any kind of policy to govern itself as far as your activities on social media. You're the only body that can do that. And so that hasn't been done. We don't have a policy. We don't have one today. I mean, I don't write policies for the council. That's within the council's purview if the council so chooses to govern itself when it comes to social media, as you do with your other policies and procedures that govern your decorum and your rules of order. The other thing that has been discussed is speech of elected officials and government employees may be regulated within the constraints of the First Amendment, and the case is interpreting that. So there's this idea that's been expressed, not necessarily here, but that you see come up on occasion, that you cannot tell another council member what they can or cannot say because you would affect their First Amendment right. That's not true. That's not true. When it pertains to council business and you set the policies, you can set those policies if you so choose when it comes to social media and the way other council members engage on social media. Again, you have not done so, but you can, and you're the only body that can do that. There's nothing in the law that's going to do that. And there's no statute out there that's going to restrict that or interject itself into that element of speech by an elected official. But what I do want to talk about tonight are some new developments because they're interesting to me, and it might put everybody else in here to sleep, which is fine. But everything changed with regards to social media back in May. And I know, isn't it interesting? The tweeter-in-chief, our president, lost a case where for banning citizens from his official Twitter feed. We're going to talk about that case. I want to talk about German versus Udely, which is out of Oregon because it involves a member of the city council banning a citizen from their personal Facebook page and how that was treated. And then there's two other cases I'll just touch on briefly. I'm not going to go into great detail on Dingwell versus Cossett or Price versus City of New York because those deal with actual employees, but one of them deals with a supervisor level employee. And when you start getting to that and you start talking about policymakers, then it gets my attention as it pertains to city council members. And so we're going to touch on that very, very briefly. But I want to make sure that we all understand where we are in social media following the Knight case, because the Knight case is a game changer because it updates all of the previous case law, in my opinion, when it pertains to speech and what is a public forum, because our public forums have evolved greatly, and it's information that council members need to be armed with as you try to manage your own social media platforms. When you don't have an official council member place whatever Facebook page and you're using your personal Facebook page and the discussion can sometimes touch and concern city business, there are some things you need to be aware of because the rules for that have changed somewhat going forward. And this is rapidly evolving. I talked to Brian James this morning about I need to run back and check before I come to the meeting because these cases are coming out quickly. Once the Knight case, Knight v. Trump, was decided, then you started getting decisions rolling out and citing it because up until that point it had not happened. So that's why I call it a game changer. So the primary point of dispute between the parties, so the Knight Institute represented a group of plaintiffs. And so if you're familiar with this case, what was going on, or if you like Charlie have been banned by President Trump? No, he hasn't, but he could be on his Twitter account. But people have been. The president has banned people from Twitter. He's cut them off and limited their access. There's a whole laundry list of people who were banned or closed off where they couldn't access the president's Twitter feed. Now, the first time I spoke to y'all about social media, you remember I told you that the National Archives had already notified the White House, look, you have to preserve every tweet this guy is sending because those are official tweets of the office. They're not just Donald J. Trump. This is a Twitter account that he had before he was president. And so they took the position, he and his staff and his lawyers took the position that, no, this is a personal Twitter account. That's what they said early on in the whole process. That position evolved to this idea that, well, this is his way of communicating with the public, so we'll acknowledge that, yes, it's a government Twitter account and it's giving out government messages, but it's his right to determine who he wants to interact with or not interact with. So that's kind of the posture behind all of this. The things that the court goes through and considers is whether or not it matters when you block a person, if you are blocking that person, if it's just your private account and you're a private citizen, or if you're a public official. This discussion already goes on, as you might understand, with your city Facebook page and the management that your employees have to go through and the policy that this council approved on when they can do these actions. So it's not something that is unheard of or unusual or something we haven't looked at. But what this is going to do is move it one step beyond what has always been reviewed up to this point. What they focused on was the interactive space, and that's where this case changed everything, is what is the interactive space and how do we view that? So there are three things they went through. They had to decide whether or not the speech which the individual plaintiffs seek to engage in is protected. So it has to be protected by the First Amendment for it to be a problem if you're shutting it off. Then they're going to go through an analysis of what is the forum. Is this even something where we go through forum analysis? And I know y'all are familiar with the discussions on what is a public forum and what constitutes a public forum. Most cities deal with this on a regular basis. And then to the extent that they conclude that a First Amendment forum is implicated, then they have to decide what type of forum that is. Is it an open forum? Is it a limited forum? Can you close it off entirely? I mean, what type of forum are we dealing with when we're talking about social media platforms? So the individual plaintiffs in this situation were seeking to engage in political speech, and such speech on matters of public concern fall within the core First Amendment protections. So the court first decides, hey, look, yeah, there's no doubt these people are wanting to engage with the president and others in political speech. That's the whole purpose. They're wanting to respond to these tweets. They're wanting to retweet these. They're wanting to respond to people who've tweeted and retweeted and replied. So there's this whole, the president generates an amazing amount of interest with his tweets, for better or worse. And you know, it's all out there, right? And so people like to respond to that. People like to see what's going on, what's being said, because what we've learned and what the court talks about is these tweets have become an insight into things. This has become a way of announcing things or giving an opinion before it's even officially announced by the White House. And the court actually recognized that and went through a discussion of that. It's like, look, he's using this as a platform for specific government messages. So it's definitely matters of public concern. So then they went through this process of the forum doctrine and trying to decide whether or not the forum in this space in question is owned or controlled by the government. Because the only way the government can have an issue with rejecting or blocking free speech is if it is actually controlled by the government. And this was quickly acknowledged, even though the Supreme Court has referred to government-owned property in certain cases. They've also said that a space can be a forum more in a metaphysical than in a spatial or geographical sense. A speaker must seek access to public property or, as the court elaborates in this instance, in this decision, private property dedicated to public use. Now, when we think about private property dedicated to public use, we don't typically think of it in the context of your Twitter account or your Facebook page or your social media platforms. But now we will, because the court says we will. The Free Speech Clause restricts only government regulation of private speech. It does not regulate government speech. Why that's important is nobody's telling the president what he can or can't tweet. We can't tell the president what he can or can't tweet. Nobody can tell any elected official what they can or can't tweet. That is not what the Free Speech Clause regulates. What it does regulate is the private speech in response to that. And that's where why it matters on that interactive space. So there's three factors that the Supreme Court looks at when it talks, and this will think about this as far as your own accounts. When you post things on your personal social media account that touch and concern your role as a city council member, okay? So whether or not speech constitutes government speech as opposed to private speech, this is what they look at. Whether government has historically used the speech in question to convey state messages. In the context of social media, it's the platform. So is this where, with President Trump's Twitter account, we know it is, right? But laying that out here for you to keep in mind as you look at your own use. Whether that speech is often closely identified in the public mind with the government. So with whatever you're saying, is the public going to read that and say, oh yeah, that's council member Dr. Kaiser the council member or Dr. Kaiser the professor? You know, what are you speaking about when you're saying this? How is the public going to view it? And to the extent to which the government maintains direct control over the messages conveyed. Now, it's your personal account, and we'll talk about in the Oregon case how that was the deciding factor. So this is not we're not talking about any kind of city-run account, and that's going to be critical at this point in time in the case law. So they went through it pretty quickly, and they talked about how, hey, look, there's no doubt President tweets is not susceptible to the content analysis for his actual speech, what he says. But the same cannot be said for the interactive space. The interactive space associated with each of the President's tweets is not government speech and is properly analyzed under the Supreme Court's forum precedents. So this is the court having to go through the gyrations that the court goes through to be able to analyze that interactive space. Okay? So while the President's speech is government speech and there's no forum analysis that you do in that context, we have to go through a forum analysis on all this all the interaction that takes place between the citizens on that Twitter forum. Because what happens is, if you block somebody, they're no longer able to participate in that forum. I won't spend a lot of time on this. This just talks about the types of forums. The court goes through the analysis on the traditional places of assembly and debate, sidewalks, parks, things such as that. Places that are open for use by the public as a place for expressive activity. To create a forum of this type, the government must intend to make the property generally available to a class of speakers. Space is susceptible, but is not traditional designation for forum. Public communication is termed a non-public forum. And then it goes through all these different things to say that the Supreme Court has evolved in its analysis with the Internet and the popularity of the Internet, where it has now become, and they've analogized the Internet to the essential venues for public gatherings of streets and parks. The lack of historic practice is dispositive. So what the court's saying in this string site, Packingham was the critical case in that, and it was back in 2017, is that, look, today's public square, today's sidewalk, today's place where people engage in debate and discuss the events and the important things of the day are online. It's through social media. That is our new street corner for people to take their things to have redress to their council or to their leaders or to anyone. And the Supreme Court has now recognized that starting in 2017, but now it's starting to get legs, and we're starting to see what that's going to mean through actual decisions issued by these federal courts. And these are all federal court cases. So, and here's what they talked about as far as this forum. Look, it's open to anybody. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican or have a particular view to be able to follow the president on Twitter. He wants all the people to follow him as possible. So it's an open forum from that context. You don't have to be part of a special group. It's not limited. And anyone with a Twitter account who's not been blocked may participate in the interactive space. So if any of us are following him now, we should do an experiment. We should all go on and retweet or reply to one of his tweets and see who could get blocked first. But you could do that in the interactive space. And it's been held out specifically by his chief tweet writer who helps him as he labeled it, this is where the president communicates directly with you, the American people. So there's no question about any of that, and so there's no question then that the interactive space, according to the court, constitutes a designated public forum. And because it is such, the blocking of the plaintiffs based on their political speech constitutes viewpoint discrimination that violates the First Amendment. So it's no different than any action you would take limiting someone's speech in a public square or anything such as that, if it's viewpoint discriminatory. Now, the defendants made the argument that the First Amendment does not apply in this case and that the president's personal First Amendment interests supersede those of the plaintiffs. The court dismissed that very quickly. Even though a public official does not lose his First Amendment rights by taking office, there's a distinction between the official's interaction with a person and the silencing of the person within a public forum. What they mean by that is, look, the president doesn't have to respond to you. If he doesn't like what you say, he doesn't have to respond to you within that interactive space. But you can't block him, because when you do that, you remove that person and that person's ability to interact with others and discuss the issues that you're tweeting about or that you're stating. Public official cannot exercise their First Amendment rights in a way that infringes the corresponding First Amendment rights of those who have criticized him or her. And so that's the primary holding in that. So, what does that mean, and what did that mean with the German Utility case? Because this one, to me, I find much more interesting. I'm the only one here that does, but I find this case much more interesting because this is right on point. This is a city council member in Oregon. Okay, they're a city council member on the Portland, Oregon City Council, and they do have an official city Facebook page. They also have an unofficial, non-city personal Facebook page. And what happened here is that Ms. German, who is an activist, a local activist, and had been very critical. The case, you should read it if you're interested in those kind of things. The case goes through all the things that Ms. German had done during council meetings to agitate and get under the skin of the various council members. And Ms. Utley, Councilmember Utley, had quite enough of this. But on her personal Facebook account, she went on a rant one day, and she went through all kinds of things and said that she'd had enough. This was it. This person's doing all these things, and the post that she made had all these comments, and they were all agreeing with the council member and telling her what she should do to this other citizen and what the other councilman. I mean, this is what y'all should do, and this is how you should treat this person. And it was just comment after comment after comment. And Commissioner Utley started responding to some, hey, you think that's bad. Just started interacting as well about this other citizen and about how bad this was and how she agreed. But she'd blocked her already, right? So she had blocked Ms. German, the activist, from her personal Facebook account, so she didn't see all these initially. So she did what citizens are prone to do. She's like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a Public Information Act request because I want to see all that information that you posted about me since you blocked me from that forum. I want to know what you said, so I'm going to make a Public Information Act request. And apparently, the Oregon Public Information Act request is much different than the Texas Public Information Act request because the commissioner just said, no, thank you. I'm going to deny your request for all that information. And I don't encourage y'all to do that, but that's what she did, and she actually gets away with it. But she's like, no, sorry, I'm not going to show you all those things. So these are some of the allegations. Ms. German was a pro se plaintiff in federal court, and she filed a 42 U.S.C. 1983 suit. Okay, that's how this got here. Now, the Knight case against President Trump, they were not pro se plaintiffs. Okay, the Knight Institute is a think tank that has activist lawyers that help make sure, and scholarly folks who make sure those cases say all the right things, right? So there's a very different path to the court system, and honestly, I think that makes a big difference. People with First Amendment lawyers, who take up their case are going to get further in the courts. But as you'll see, she still has another shot at this. So anyway, Ms. German alleges that Commissioner Utley made up a rude song, that she scolded Ms. German for silencing other people's voices. This is in council chambers. Repeatedly walked out or was absent from city council meetings. Apparently when Ms. German would get up to speak, this other council member is like, okay, gets up, it's time to go get a drink or something, would leave the dais rather than listen to whatever this citizen had to say. And she also alleges that she requested that Portland's Bureau of Human Resources and City Council investigate. Well, she asked them to investigate Commissioner Utley's actions. So they all rejected it, like nobody's going to do anything about it. So here's what you have to state a claim for, though, for First Amendment retaliation against a government official. They have to show that they engaged in a constitutionally protected activity. As a result, he was subjected to adverse action by the defendant that would chill a person of ordinary firmness from continuing to engage in the protected activity, and there was a substantial causal relationship between the constitutionally protected activity and the adverse action. So that's what you have to show First Amendment retaliation when you feel like your free speech has been quelled by a public official by not allowing you to engage within a forum that they have created, right? So this is how she says she did this. So she violated her right to even petition the government when she blocked her from viewing and otherwise participating in her non-official Facebook account. And she admits that it was her non-official Facebook account, right? So she hasn't been blocked or banned from the official commissioner Facebook account, just the private one. But she says she still has had her rights violated. The defendants argue that it wasn't a state action, and that's critical, as you saw the first part of that. Now, this all is going to turn on whether or not the public forum, I should have said forum, apologize for that, is operated by the government, but by Ms. Utley in her personal capacity. So unlike the Knight case, they did go through the state action analysis. So in the Knight case, they didn't go through the state action analysis on President Trump because he said, yeah, this is a government account. Yeah, these are my government views. So you don't have to go through whether or not it was a state act. And then where this ends at is the core question, okay? They didn't dismiss all her claims. The court did give her leave to amend her complaint. So this case survives on the First Amendment retaliation. It survives if she can plead facts sufficient to show that this council member, this commission member, was using her personal Facebook page to espouse her views as a commissioner, thereby creating that public forum, because that's how she gets to stay in the court case. That's how she gets to pursue a case for First Amendment retaliation, right? So if she's not banned from this official Facebook page, she has to show that personal Facebook page has become a de facto government-run page. That you as a commission member, this person as a commission member, as a policymaker, when you're the policymaker, when you do something, you can amend policy, right? So if you go down a different road and everybody starts going down that road, the policies actually can be found by a court to have changed. So that's one thing that we'll talk about. But the other thing is that she has to show that that's what she was using that account for. Because if she's done that, she's, based on the Knight case, can no longer block the citizens from that Facebook page. You couldn't do it. And so I wanted to talk about this case because it's something that if you're managing your own Facebook pages and your own Twitter accounts as council members, and they're not official pages, but you use them to interact with your constituents as a council member, and you get messages out there about what the council is doing and what things are coming before the council, it's just a word of caution if you get to the point where you have somebody that you would really like to block on that page, or you don't like what they're saying on your page. And if you get to that point, we probably should have some conversations about how to handle those situations. Just very quickly, I'm not going to spend as much time on these. Dingwell versus Cassette. The reason why I put these in here, though, and can talk to you about them separately or give you the cases, is that even though this involves the police department, what happens is you get this bleed-over activity in both of these last two cases that I was going to talk about. You get this bleed-over activity where it doesn't stay on Facebook, right? So they don't like what a person's saying on Facebook, so that police department starts taking some official actions outside of Facebook, such as harassing type behavior, pulling someone over, giving them citations that may or may not be merited after blocking them on Facebook. So the whole argument in this case gets to the point of saying, look, you don't like their viewpoint, and you blocked them from an official Facebook page, an official Twitter account. You're retaliating against them because you don't like what they're posting. The court goes through that entire thing. The ACLU is involved in this case. This case survived on all counts, right? So there was no maybe or maybe not on this one, but because it was an official account, there was no dispute about it. But what's interesting about it is where you get into, let me find it here, the Monell. When they start going through Monell, anytime you see Monell in any kind of analysis in a federal court, that means the court's looking at, is this because the chief was involved, right? So if the chief's involved, whether it's your employees who have charge over your city Facebook account, or if it's you personally involved with your Facebook account, once it gets to the level where you have decision makers doing things, either making decisions regarding that account or activities out in the real world, not in social media platforms, then you're going to have some discussions about whether or not Monell applies and whether or not the behavior of that person subjects the entity itself to some type of liability, some type of review. Because you're always going to get into discussions on these things about whether these individuals, these employees, had any kind of qualified immunity. But when a Monell claim is based on the decision of a municipal policymaker with final policymaking authority, a single action by such a decision maker is sufficient to confer municipal liability under 1983. Where you normally see these kind of discussions are police cases, and they're cases where you have a chief or someone in authority who actually goes out in the field, right, and they take a call or they do something or they engage in a pursuit and it violates their own policies, because they'll say, no. If he's the final policymaker, and a lot of cities have it where the chief isn't the final policymaker on the actual policies and procedures, but if he is, then he didn't violate that pursuit policy. He amended it. That's what the plaintiffs say, right? So you get into this whole discussion over Monell when it becomes a final policymaker. And so we'll come back to that point. Last one is Price. Nothing new on this one, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is the same type of situation where you have a citizen who gets blocked from the police accounts and then the mayor's account. She was a domestic violence victim, but it was a situation where she's repeatedly abused, and she comes in and makes claims and then requests they be dismissed. And so the district attorney up in New York decides to put her on this list where, okay, we're not taking your cases anymore. So then the police decide, you know what, we're not looking at your posts anymore. We're blocking you. You can't post either. So there's all this string of events that happened to basically push her out of having any ability to contact through social media platforms, right? And so that's what this case is about. It also survived on most claims, but they did grant, in New York at least, the other case was Connecticut. In New York, they granted qualified immunity to the officers because they were not the final decision maker. They were not the final policy makers. So they got qualified immunity, and it didn't flow to the city in that situation. Let's see. This is just restating a lot of. So here's what I want to. Here's the summary, and I'll be done. I'll answer any questions. So here's the new developments that are of somewhat of concern, just as cautionary to council members. With sufficiently pleaded facts, a public official's private social media account may be subject to forum analysis when used to promote their work as an elected official. Okay, that's what, if we take the Trump holding and we look at some of the other cases that have happened since then, that's the test, right? Because in Oregon, they said, look, go back and try to replead your case. Because if you can state sufficient facts that show that this private account was being used for government business and the policymaker was controlling this message, then you might have a case for First Amendment retaliation if you've been blocked or they've said things about you that you don't like, et cetera, et cetera. If forum analysis reveals the public official uses the private social media platform in a manner that has created a limited public forum, the First Amendment protections afforded private citizens in such a form apply to the public official's presumed private social media platform. Even in the absence of a policy, an elected official who creates a limited public forum may not block users for their viewpoint. So even if this council, and that's really the cautionary tale, even if y'all never adopt a policy to govern yourself, now the courts are getting to the point where, depending on that activity, they will look at it if a proper complaint is filed and the allegations come forward. Now, that's a lot of ifs, and I'm not here to scare anyone, at all. But I have a duty to make you aware that the law's changed since the first time I stood in front of you and talked to you about social media platforms. Now, this is the other part of it. So a public official who approves a policy for the governmental entity may be presumed to have understood the legal principles of the policy. So we hope so, right? So this council approved the social media policy for the city. And so understanding that if your private or your personal accounts fall under that same analysis because of the way you use those, that policy is going to come back, right? That policy is going to come back to you in some form or fashion by a plaintiff saying, you approved this policy, and so these are the principles that apply to your account if it's a government account, right? So Not saying it is, but I'm saying if that's how the analysis will go if you use your personal account to engage in that type of activity. A governmental entity will not likely be held liable or responsible for the actions of an individual public official absent an official policy, custom, practice, or failure to train that directly caused the harm. This is your training one more time as I'm advising you that you need to watch out for these type of things. So if you, what it's referring to is that's how you impose liability to the entity, is through the actions of an employer or official or policymaker, is if there's somehow been some official policy, custom, practice, or failure to train. So this continues to evolve daily, weekly, monthly, and we're going to continue to monitor it. It's something that bears your watching as well. Again, it's up to the council when and if you ever have a policy, but even if you did, that policy would have to be constantly evolving. I mean, I'll talk to the staff as well about making sure, we got to make sure that social media policy that we have that controls the official city pages is continually updated and reviewed in light of these cases as they come down. The Trump case came down towards the end of May, and by mid-June, we had another dozen cases that were citing it. I just picked and choose some that were most relevant to cities and to council members. Ultimately, you're going to see more and more Attorney General opinions start getting into advising on platforms and those sort of things. But we think it's already fairly clear that any of those posts are public information if they concern the public's business. If you're doing the business of the public through any of those platforms, it's subject to the Public Information Act because it meets the definition of what is public information. So that is all I have, Mayor Pro Tem, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can and elaborate on any of these principles.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I've been sitting through a court-martial or something.
Sorry.
It's all right. A lot of good information, though. I'll give you that. I've got 3 comments. The first is, so the city councils have the right to govern themselves.
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
2, adherence to ethical codes of conduct does not violate a council member's First Amendment rights.
That is correct. You know, it depends on how it's written, but certainly, yeah, you can control how this council does this council's business.
And finally, so a policy we adopted for our employees pretty much also applies to us because we are the policymakers?
It could. It doesn't as we sit here today. It would if you use a personal Facebook or social media platform in the same manner that the city's official platform is used. So someone's going to have to make that argument. As you sit here today, no, I'm not going to say that the city's policy applies to you. What I said was if you use your personal social media account as if it were an official government account, since you are a policymaker, that policy is going to be looked at by anyone seeking to challenge you on your use of that account because you approved it, and it governs the city's accounts.
Very interesting. Okay, I'll open up to the city or to the council for comments. Anybody? Dr. Kaiser.
Just a couple of things. So I understand if you block someone, what if you just delete someone's comments all the time? As soon as they come up, you're the administrator. And, you know, we've got some other, not just personal accounts, but some that, you know, we have administrators for that they discuss city business. So if someone comes up and you're constantly deleting or you block their notifications, you don't take them off the Facebook page, but then they're...
So I think that, and I can get you, if you want, those. I'll email you those cases, because there is a discussion in one of them about the nuances. In the Knight case, it goes into the nuances between blocking versus hiding. You know, and so it's a very nuanced discussion, and they don't really make any kind of final decision on that, right? They focus on the blocking because that was the allegation of those who brought the case. And I think the analysis when they go through it, or if they ever looked at that part of it, is the question is going to be, are you prohibiting them from participating in the forum itself? Because the forum isn't the interaction with you. right? If it's a government forum, if it's a public forum, it's the interaction with everyone else. So if by removing those comments every time you're posted, you are preventing that individual person from expressing their First Amendment rights and interacting with others, I think there's a good chance, yes. I think there's a good chance that would be viewed the same way, right? So that decision hasn't come down yet on hiding or deleting individual posts. Only blocking is what we have right now. But I think it's evolving, and if I were predicting, I'd say, well, sure, it's a logical next step, right? Is that because the analysis will be whether or not you are preventing them from participating in the forum.
And then we have some, for example, we have like I think it's called Schertz Cibolo 1 community, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of information is posted on there, council members go on there, and citizens, and there is a lot of interaction, government information interaction. So does that fall under the same thing? You know, the administrators?
Right. I would not. I would argue no, it does not, because unless you, as a council member, are the moderator, you're the one controlling who gets to participate in this forum or not, then I don't think that any of these cases are going to be informative on those types of message boards. Those are just general message boards without limitation as to who can participate or not participate.
Okay. Thank you.
Can we just blame Russia for everything? No, joking. So it looks like we have a lot of work to do with our policy when it regards to social media. So, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, you were thinking about at one time having a committee to do some work on this. Are you guys still on that vein, or what kind of direction do we want to give our city staff with this?
I have no problem putting together a committee to go over the guidelines and whatnot. I proposed that before. I still think it's a valid mechanism to go about developing a policy, and I'm still in favor of it. Anybody else? Yeah, it's really interesting because every time this topic comes up, they want to spin it around the First Amendment rights. It really doesn't have to do with First Amendment rights. The way I view this is our residents want information. How do they get that information? What's the most valid source of information? My contention is, hey, you know what? You shouldn't rely on any individual council member. Individual council members do not speak the consensus of this city council. In my mind, about the only person who really appreciates the consensus of this council would be the mayor. He's closest to it. He doesn't always agree with the consensus of the council, but he understands it probably better than anybody else. Understand, I don't want everybody sending messages to the mayor. I think our Schertz Public Information Office, they do a great job maintaining a Facebook account or an information-based account. And personally, I think that's probably the best place for people to go if they're really looking for information. So how do we go about structuring that within the city to provide the residents with what they want? In lieu of that, how would you suggest we put together a committee legally to actually develop the guidelines?
There's really not a legal component to that. I mean, if y'all are welcome to form a committee and discuss policies that govern the council, I mean, just as you would any other committee that is formed. I don't have your rules in front of me, but I think I do want to reiterate though that none of these cases stand for the proposition that individual council members are not free to say what they want on their platforms or anything such as that. None of these cases stand for the proposition that speech is limited. What they stand for is and the only reason I brought them forward is please be mindful how you monitor and treat your social media platforms if you're using them as a quasi-official city council platform. That's really the takeaway.
Understand. Councilmember Gutierrez.
For clarity, what you stated is, Facebook or Twitter it's basically a designated public forum where council members can voice their opinions.
Okay, so the designated public forum is a very specific finding in case law for a public forum based on how it's used. And yes, what these cases say is that a public official's presumed personal or private Facebook account or Twitter or any social media platform could become a designated public forum. It all depends on how you use it.
Okay.
And if there's nothing wrong if it does, but then you have a responsibility to manage your behavior if you are going to start preventing people from participating.
You also stated, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it does not violate the Open Meetings Act if 4 council members are interacting in the Facebook page?
So I don't recall saying that. There's only one official message board way that a city can set up a city message board. Okay, and this city does not have that message board set up that is compliant with the Open Meetings Act.
But
whether or not council members' activities out in the social media world constitute anything such as that is something that would have to be looked at case by case. I mean, that's not. If I said that, that was not what I meant to imply.
Okay. Now, I'm referring to private accounts. I think we addressed the city accounts, but I'm more interested in the private accounts. On the Ms. German's case, it was basically based on the blocking and not what was said about her.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the core of the First Amendment still stands.
That's correct.
So
That's right.
So in reality, council members are free to express any opinions, issues, or concerns they might have on their own private page.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. None of those cases stand for that. They stand for, and my caution was, you can create a designated public forum, and if you do, be careful how you limit other people's use or interaction within that interactive space, right? So,
what it comes down to is judgment. You're responsible for what you put.
Sure. Absolutely.
Councilmember Davis.
So basically what I've said all along is council just needs to apply some common sense and understand the rules and the fact that the rules are evolving every day. Understand the difference between a personal page and one where you're representing yourself as an elected official, because they are 2 distinct categories. And be aware that, yes, you have the right to respond to the residents, but potentially, if there is a community page that's not controlled by any of us, if there's a running dialogue on there, and I guess at this point it would come down to how you respond, but if you were to respond on a public page that's controlled by someone else, and your response is reflective of your opinion or your commentary as the elected official, then I would think that if other elected officials from the same group responded in that same thread, then potentially we could have a quorum violation. If we're discussing policy and actions as a council member.
Right. If you have deliberation is what the act says.
And that was my point. It's a matter of educating our council. No, never. The intent was never to tell someone they can't engage and they can't have a dialogue, but understand the potential that if you're getting into that policy discussion and it's on somebody else's community page, then potentially we could be creating an online city council forum.
Someone could make that argument.
Yeah,
I'm not prepared to say
and it could
that.
end up being a court case, and we could see the next one would be somebody versus Schertz. So again, my whole intent, and I feel like I was responsible for raking up the muck on this, was just making sure the council members know that it's a ever-changing environment. Be careful what you say and how you say it out there, because there is a difference of whether or not you're acting as a personal resident, a citizen, or you're acting in a capacity that you are elected as an elected official.
And Councilman, that has always been the case. What's changed is it's moved from how that used to always happen in the out and about real world.
It's moved from standing out in front of this building or down at Pickle Park to now it's electric.
That's correct.
Electronic.
That's what has changed. And what we will do is we're going to continue to monitor this, and we will get updates through the city manager out to the council as needed, as if anything happens that is of note that we believe that you need to have immediately, because it is ever changing.
Anybody else? Okay, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to have that presentation made available to all the members of the council, even those who aren't here tonight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be in the council.
I believe it's
is it
in Dropbox? Okay.
I was late in getting it to her. I got it to her this afternoon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and the other thing is, because we have two members missing tonight, the mayor and Councilmember Larson, I'd like to really postpone dealing with this tonight. Mm-hmm. However, reserve the right to bring it up next time we meet, so we can try to figure out some way to go about developing guidelines. Mr. Edwards.
So I do have one last question, Mr. Santee. So the code of ethics, or the code of ethics for the actual council, would it cover the social media aspect of it?
Your rules of decorum and ethics and things such as that.
Right.
It can. I mean, as far as from a behavior standpoint, or what you, I mean, that's up to this council how you interpret that application of those rules. Again, Councilman, I don't have them all memorized, so but that's within the purview of the council to determine the applicability of those standards.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mrs. Santee. Okay, next workshop item regarding the City of Schertz UDC masonry wall requirements, and this was brought to our attention by Council Members Larson and Councilmember Crawford. Councilmember Larson isn't here tonight, but I'm sure Councilmember Crawford may have a question or two for you.
Good evening, Council. My name is Emily Groby, and I have Bryce Cox with me here from the Planning Division, and we're going to first start off with the UDC requirements that are currently in place. The first one we just want to talk about is UDC Article 9, Section 2198B3, and this is where the fences adjacent to residential property code requirement comes in. So it states basically any non-residential or multifamily use that is adjacent to a zoned or used single-family residential property is required to install an 8-foot masonry wall. The next requirement, so this is in addition to that masonry wall, the non-residential or multifamily use is required to install a 20-foot wide landscape buffer that has a minimum of 1 shade tree planted for each 30 linear feet and a minimum of 10 shrubs for each 50 linear feet. So just to be clear, on the property line there's the masonry wall, the 8-foot masonry wall, and then inside that masonry wall on the non-residential or multifamily property is the 20-foot landscape buffer with the required planting. Two other code sections that are semi-relevant on the 8-foot masonry wall discussion is where subdivisions are platted, where the rear or side yards of single-family residential lots are adjacent to principal or secondary arterial roadways. They're also required to install an 8-foot masonry wall. Additionally, we have a requirement that if the rear yard of any residential or non-residential lot abuts a principal or secondary arterial, they're required to install the 8-foot wall as well. So the reasoning for the current UDC requirements for that masonry wall, it's really to help mitigate the light and sound pollution from the non-residential to the adjacent residential property. It's there to really provide that visual and audible barrier of the noise, of the light that is created on that non-residential property to the adjacent residential home. Over the last couple of years, we've received many comments both for and against the masonry wall requirement from residents. So we wanted to provide a couple of pros and cons that we've received. For the pros, it's kind of what you'd expect: increased safety from the proposed non-residential development. It provides for increased mitigation for the noise and light that comes from the non-residential development. Most of the cons that we've received are not necessarily against the landscaping requirement. It's primarily against that masonry wall. One of the ones that kind of stuck out was if the non-residential property has been very highly vegetated, the adjacent residential doesn't want to see a masonry wall go in. They'd like to see a landscape barrier instead, something similar to what they're used to seeing there. So in our current UDC, staff does not have the ability to review and approve alternatives. We basically have to enforce that 8-foot masonry requirement and the landscaping. There's no ability for staff to make any discretion on that. There's also no ability for us to take any alternative to a board or commission to say, well, we don't want to do the masonry wall, we want to do this instead. We don't have that ability. Staff has been considering a concept for proposed UDC amendment to allow staff to both evaluate and approve an alternative design standard, but we are in the very preliminary concept phase of that. We'd have to do a lot more research from the target cities and best practices. So essentially we'd have to do more research and then go through a proposed UDC amendment. Something that we've looked at currently is to allow the non-residential or multifamily developer essentially 2 outright options. The first one would be to install the masonry wall with a lower requirement for landscaping and a reduction in the buffer width. Or they would have the option to not install the masonry wall, but rather plant a larger landscape buffer area with a continuous screening at the time the business would open, in the hope that that would allow for to mitigate some of those comments from the residential. Well, it's always been landscaping, we'd like to see the landscaping continue, that kind of thing. One thing to note is that our current requirements are for any non-residential or multifamily properties that are adjacent to use or zoned single-family residential properties. Even if it's, for example, on FM 42, there's a lot of properties that are zoned manufacturing light, but they're used as single-family homes currently. That's just what's been there. And if a commercial development, which is what is allowed in that zoning district, goes in next door, they would have to put up that masonry wall and do the screening because it's used. So we would make the recommendation that we change that provision where this requirement is only in place when it's actually zoned for single-family residential. So I want to open it up for kind of discussion questions. We're very open to kind of what council would like to see from us moving forward.
So it's interesting. At the moment, your hands are tied, really. You don't have the option. It's either an 8-foot wall or, there is no second. Okay, so that is the position at the moment. Councilmember Crawford.
Since Scott isn't here, it's not a good idea that I presume I know what he wanted to discuss. And Brian just stepped out of the chamber. And my concern was Cedric wasn't here either. It was Father Ed that spoke 2 weeks ago about waiving the barrier. That was my concern when I made the comment after Scott made the first comment about putting it on the agenda. I was wondering if there's any mechanism that allows for changes or variations, and basically y'all have said there is not.
At this time, there is not.
So now that Brian's back in here, I can put him on the spot. Because it's not just the church that may be asking for a variation, a developer may be asking for a variation. And that brings up the conundrum of we might want to do something for our church we wouldn't want to do for a development. And is that the right and fair way to do business? So if Mr. James has any comments about any kind of waiver for doing something for a church you wouldn't do for a development, that's why I brought it up. I wanted to know if there was a way to help, or nope, this is the rule, we have to play by the rule. And what do we do? Can we help? Can we not help?
So I'll take a little bit of a crack on that. So staff, as we deal with a variety of development from residential, commercial, nonprofit, religious, for-profit development, I'm just trying to get my daughter and her 2 kids a new house to live next to me. I mean, we hear the gambit of all of it. One of the really hard things in city planning that we have to deal with on this also is that feeling of equity. Do we treat everyone fairly? Does everybody get a good shake, kind of regardless of who you are? And for the most part, our code is written in that format. It isolates specific groups of things. So as the council may know, a couple years ago we made revisions to the Unified Development Code regarding architectural designs. We made them specific to the type of use that's going to be occurring at that building. So offices have different requirements than industrial buildings, which have different requirements than retail, which has different requirements than multifamily or single family. You know, these general group categories are important, but then we kind of stop at that higher level, because once you go too specific, it's too much about that personal case, and it's not fair to everyone else who may have a similar situation but isn't exactly the same. But the code does provide for allowances when there are very unique conditions to the land, to existing items via the variance process, which is what the Board of Adjustment really serves as when those unique conditions occur. Now, the Board of Adjustment isn't going to take into account, well, I'm a church and I'm not, I'm funded through my congregation, I'm not a for-profit business, but the impacts can be the same. So the impact that the church has to the adjacent property can be similar to a lower intensity commercial use. Obviously, it's not the same as Walmart coming in next to you, but they do make noise. Most churches these days are active beyond just the weekends. They have Sunday school or daycare classes that kind of go throughout the day. So then we have this more school-like use. So there are those impacts. Now, all of that in there, I think that staff's opinion is receiving the input of council as a whole to look at what are our options, what are the flexibility that we can provide. If it is the desire and guidance of council, we're happy to go back, start chewing on these options, come back to you with some a little more concrete items as we're able to research a little further about what some of our target cities do, what some of our neighboring cities do, how to best handle this. This provision hasn't been looked at since I've been here, which is about 5 years, and I'm sure it hasn't been looked at before then either, for many years. So as a general planning practice, it is important to buffer between these uses because there are detrimental impacts. Just as everyone can think, man, this is what kind of business do I not want right behind my house? And I think we can all think of a number of items. And then how much better is it if it's a low-intensity business like a medical office building? Is that big of an issue? Well, maybe not, but you also don't want that medical office right up next to your back fence where you can basically see and hear everything going on there, or the dumpster enclosure set right up next to your gate and they're throwing away stinky trash. There are a number of mitigating factors, and every development is unique and has its own unique features. So, kind of on that long-winded point, I'll come back around and just say it is possible to do. It is possible to further refine this requirement, maybe not to the church level. That may be getting a little too specific, and I'll look over to Dan to kind of give me some guidance on that about providing requirements that don't apply to specific use categories down to that level. Yes, no.
So maybe trying this. So I think the concern would be is it's problematic to write a regulation that is specific just to a church. Again, as Dan may likely tell you, while you may be thinking you're being helpful, you have singled out a church for a particular different standard that may still prove problematic, and you may face a RLUIPA issue.
So, again, to the flexibility portion, there are ways to recraft the code as we have done without adding a bunch of time, because that's the other portion to this. The question is, we have it go to a board or commission or back to city council or go through an elaborate process. That's time that we are adding on to these developments that they're sitting and waiting, versus coming up with some standards that everyone's happy with, that everybody's comfortable with, that do open up options and flexibility.
Thank you. And since Scott isn't here, I have no further issue at this point, unless someone else on council does. But I feel that Scott does deserve a chance to look at this or hear this again, subject to the will of the council. So
Councilmember Edwards.
He made the request before I did.
Okay.
And I didn't clearly understand that he was making it for I think the same reason I did, but I don't know that because I didn't ask him. So I'm satisfied with the answers you gave me. If we want to look at that again as a council, I'm happy to do that. But you've answered my questions. I don't know if Brian knows, but I think maybe 6 years ago, somewhere along in there, because I was on P&Z starting in 2010, I think we did look at some of these things. And that might have been as Brian got here, just before he got here, but I could be wrong. So I'm not trying to say it needs to be changed. I'm just asking what we have, and you've explained that, and I will stop, and we can figure out what we want to do to help Scott out.
Very well. Councilmember Edwards.
So we're not taking each property case by case and deciding to give a variance to a commercial property versus a church versus I don't think that's wise, personally. So the gentleman that comes in and he's the developer and he's putting a $3 million project in, he's got to build a masonry wall. Am I right? So if the church comes in and they build a $3 million project next to residential, they should probably build a wall as well. So are you guys looking for direction from us on changing this particular item?
So I would say the direction that we are looking for is it exists now as it is. Staff does recognize that at a bare minimum, one of the items that we do not like is the fact that it applies to both residentially zoned property and residentially used property, which creates kind of a funny conundrum when we have what we would call a typically legal non-conforming use of, let's say, a residential that's now been zoned into a commercial district.
Okay. Typically,
that kind of item sunsets, and over time, as the market comes up, that property will sell and redevelop as commercial. And so it potentially creates, and we luckily haven't had this issue come up yet. We came close a couple times, where a property was looking at developing adjacent to another commercially zoned tract, but there was a single-family home on it. And so per the regulation, that new commercial property would be required to install a masonry wall along the property line. And so now we're buffering commercial to commercial.
So as we continue to grow, we're going to see more things like this because all the land is being utilized and people are selling off these residential lots and so forth. So I think you go forward and bring us back the best suggestion.
Yeah, and so to be clear, we are looking for direction on if this is an item that council wants staff to look at and bring forward as, start investigating, researching, bring forward recommendations, or even work through Planning and Zoning Commission to prepare some items for council.
Well, since it's Scott and Mr. Crawford, you have any direction you want to give?
The comment that I would make, based on what you just said, we sit up here as council members, we don't do your job. So we don't see everything that comes through the front door at y'all's office. So you might be better prepared to tell us when we need to look at something than when we have a resident come up to the dais and ask us to do something specific to one item. Not trying to be disrespectful to that individual. I'm just saying that when one person comes up and asks a question, we don't have any clue the variances you just talked about. So I'm reluctant to say go do something for one individual when we don't know how that's going to affect all the other people that are coming down the road. So like Mr. Edwards just said. So it's a conundrum that I don't like to be in. I don't know that any of us want to be in that position, but we do have a set of standards that we vote on and approve. And I would say if staff came to us and said we need to change something and y'all do that, we do look at it. But this was an individual coming, asking for some help, and I don't hear everybody saying we should make a change.
Councilmember Gutierrez had his light on.
Okay. From what I understand, the main objective is noise and light. Okay. There is a big difference between a private business and something that fits the needs of the community. So that's one thing that probably needs to be worked in if you were to do a rewrite. There's a big difference, like I said, private business, I will continuously have patrons coming in and out and in and out, where there's a community, a facility that feeds, that assists the community in this situation, the church, or anything else that it might be. Like they said, a pantry. So there needs to be a variance on that. We also need to allow the other person that lives on the opposite side of the property to voice his opinion. If he's okay with it, that has to be taken into account. If the homeowner has no objections to it, then a waiver and exemption in this situation will be something that should be considered. So maybe adding that to the rewrite. The consensus of that landowner will play a big part in our decision. If you have a homeowner that's set against it, well, we have to consider his rights. But when the landowner has no objections, then we have to consider might not be a bad idea. So I don't envy you. It's a hard decision, like you said. We want to play a fair game. But sometimes we have to look and see what's in the best interest of this community. And that's where the tough decisions have to come in. Thanks.
Dr. Kaiser?
I realize the flexibility issue. I do think if you're going to ask an owner, are you okay with not putting up the wall, what happens when the next owner comes in? That would be problematic if then that owner says, no, I want the wall. Now what do you do? So I can see where that would be problematic. I'm going to put you on the spot. So if you were making a recommendation as staff, would you, you don't want to answer, what would you, do you think there needs to be some flexibility, or, just based on the experiences that you've had with businesses and, residential development, what would you recommend?
So if I may, Dr. Kaiser, and then I'll let staff give their opinion on this. I think keep in mind we have a couple of kind of aspects to this issue. Last meeting, council asked that we come forward with this topic, and it was prompted by someone getting up and saying, there's a requirement for it to build this wall, can you do something? That seemed to sort of set it up. And so what staff did is walked you through, here's the current requirement. I don't know that staff directly sort of touched on that issue per se. I think that's where they're looking for direction from council. I think what you've got, and I'll let them kind of reiterate this, is that if you had asked them 3 months ago, 6 months ago, just in conversation, hey, where do you see some areas we could maybe make some adjustments to the code? One area that they have tried to do over the last couple of years is the code is very black and white. It was sort of a one-size-fits-all, and I think working with P&Z, what we've tried to do is that one-size-fits-all doesn't necessarily make sense. So, for instance, with architectural standards, there are a couple of options. Developer can pick which one suits them. We're agreeable to either, and I think that's a bit of what you've heard from staff going down that path of, some flexibility may be warranted as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. I think you're right. It becomes problematic that we sort of poll the adjacent residents and somehow that they decide. It becomes problematic for developers to know it's there. And I think from really staff's perspective, we look at what's the impact of that use on adjacent properties. And so let me just stick with the church thing for a minute. When I was a kid growing up, church was kind of open on Saturday evening for Mass, Sunday morning for Mass, Sunday evening for Mass, and that was kind of it and shut down. But nowadays, churches are literally every night of the week, there's something going on. In the evenings, there's something going on. Farmers markets, all sorts of stuff. So you get a lot of activity that, again, has that effect to need to buffer. So I'll let staff offer that up, but maybe kind of keep in mind we've got two elements. One was what council's intent was with this, and then the other is as staff is looking over, and I know they've been working on a whole list of stuff that they think should be changed in the code, I'll let them answer your question.
So I would say that, and we've had this conversation among staff, and we probably each one of the fun things about the staff that we have here is that none of us see exactly the same on anything, which is good, because we get a lot of decisions by consensus, and so we get the best possible option. So with that said, I would say that we all agree that this is an item that if you're going to add flexibility, it's doable. It's very doable to do an option. So as Brian was saying, one of the concepts we introduced with the architectural standards was do this or that. So for example, on commercial, like a strip center, they're required to have windows. And the requirement for option A is 30% of the building facade of the street-facing side has to be windows. Well, that may not work in every single situation, so we have an option B, which is a higher percentage, and I want to say it's 60% off the top of my head, but it's maybe a little less. So we calculate 60% of the front facade, come up with a number of square feet, and that's how many windows they have to have, but they can spread it around the building. So that's a much higher percentage. We're going to end up with some amount of windows on the front inherently because it's a much greater percentage. And so that's kind of where we were going with some of our kind of rough-end proposal. If council is looking to say, yeah, we want to introduce some flexibility or at least see what the options are, we would institute something more along those lines that is a decision that the developer has, whether they're a church or a business or whatever non-residential developer, multifamily developer, is able to come in and say, I can do option A or option B. Either one works. The city's okay with both. And they both have their unique merits. So there's going to be some properties that are really cramped on space, and they say, I'll pay for that wall in a heartbeat because I get a little bit more space so I can get that extra parking space or two in. Then we have other people who have a lot of extra land and say, maybe I don't want to do that wall. And so a great example of this is the Autumn Winds Assisted Living Center. We did a rezone recently into a planned development district. And in part of that was because the residents had spoken up who are adjacent to it, saying, we like the existing trees, we want that maintained, we want just this bigger buffer, we don't want you to come cut down trees or trench out shrubs just to put a wall in. And they were very vocal, which is a unique item in this condition. Wasn't much opposition against that. And so staff heard them and said, well, let's look at doing this thing. And we introduced a heavier planting requirement and a wider buffer. We don't know what those numbers should be for everyone. That's part of that. We got to research and figure out where those specifics come in. But in concept, it's a wider buffer with a much heavier planting screen versus a masonry wall with a slightly smaller buffer. Because once you put the wall up, we're not really getting a whole lot out of that 20 feet of space or the shrubs. Arguably, you can still see the trees that still stands there, but if you want to cut something out, because we've received that criticism as well of you require all this extra landscaping, but it's at the back of the commercial property, nobody can see it. It's extra maintenance, kind of what's that like? So our part is kind of a two-part item of being a little bit more lenient with the wall and saying we'll let you have a little bit smaller buffer and a little less planting requirements. Still want some vegetation, still want some plants and trees back there. Or much bigger buffer, much heavier, denser tree.
Anybody else? Mr. Crawford?
Planning and zoning has been willing to make changes and bring them to council in the last 2 years that I've been around. And when we made some of the decision back in 2010 through 16 when I was on the board, we knew that we might be making it too black and too white and that things would probably change. And you've addressed that issue now. So that's just a comment. We're going to muddy the waters again when we get to item number 11 because we're going to vote on changing the UDC section 9 and 16 for wastewater and water. So we're talking about something for a different organization, the city, versus the development or a church or a commercial building of some sort. So I do think that y'all's input, and we're missing Mr. Larson's input, I do think that y'all's input has value, and Mr. James is, y'all have experience we don't have. So I'd like to put it back in y'all's court, if that's okay with the rest of the council, and see what Mr. Larson has to say, and I'll stop at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The standards are good. We have standards for a reason. And yeah, they may be black and white, but like you said, it is fair and equitable to everyone concerned. If you start doing things by a case-by-case basis, you no longer have standards. Now, I think the primary focus here should be on what's our objective with a wall. What is it we're trying to accomplish? And then, perhaps instead of having standards or flexibility, we can have both standards and a bit of flexibility. So, okay, I'm going to throw the ball back in your court. Come up with some ideas how we could achieve both. Now, for individual cases, I know we got a BOA, and they handle legitimate hardships that are being imposed upon them by our policies. That's what the BOA is for. And I'm also wondering the Buildings and Standards Commission. Perhaps that's a secondary avenue of recourse. I'm all for developing more flexibility, but not at the expense of our minimizing our standards. Mr. James, I could tell your finger there.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think here's what I'd say. I think what council or what staff has done tonight is giving you a kind of an idea of what they would generally propose. They can go back, work with P&Z, see how they may adjust it in terms of some slight variation. But in terms in concept, their kind of proposal is what I think they say this would be a good fit to give some flexibility, let them vet it through P&Z, come back with something modified. I will say, Mayor Pro Tem, that keep in mind that what you heard the other night, just to take that as an example, it was a financial hardship. Financial hardship is not a basis for granting a variance from BOA, and it would not be a basis of going through building and standards. There's not really that issue. I think the tough part is really everyone is empathetic, but our empathy doesn't give us a basis to make that variation, whatever it might be.
Okay, well stated. Okay, hey, thanks so much for the information. Going once, going twice. Any other comments? Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, consent agenda items. And bear with me, please. Item 1, approval of the minutes of the regular City Council meeting of July 24th, 2018. Item number 2, ordinance number 18M25, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, amending the City of Schertz codes of ordinances and creating other ordinances by amending and establishing fees for certain license, permits, and other services provided by the City of Schertz. Final reading. Item number 3, resolution number 18R95, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the acquisition of permanent and temporary easements and property necessary for the completion of pipelines and appurtenances. I love that word. I had to look it up. Related to the Woman Hollering Creek Watershed Main Project. Item number 4, resolution number 18R96, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an interlocal cooperative agreement with the cities of Cibolo, Live Oak, Universal City, and Selma, and Bexar County, and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 5, resolution number 18R98, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing and approving the second of 2 one-year extensions to the on-call engineering services master agreement with Cobb, Fendley, and Associates, Inc., and all matters in connection therewith. Item number 6, resolution number 18R99, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing and approving the second of 2 one-year extensions to the on-call engineering services master agreement with Ford Engineering, Inc., and all matters in connection therewith. Item number 7, resolution number 18R100, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing and approving the second of 2 one-year extensions to the on-call engineering services master agreement with Lockwood, Andrews, and Noonan, Inc., and all matters in connection therewith. Item number 8, resolution number 18R101, A resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing and approving the second of 2 one-year extensions to the on-call engineering services master agreement with Pape Dawson Engineering, Inc., and all matters in connection therewith. Item number 9, resolution number 18R102, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, approving and authorizing a right-of-way dedication, including public utility and drainage easements along Hubertus Road from Comel Independent School District. Acceptance of such right-of-way dedication by the city in accordance with the terms of the dedication agreement and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 10, resolution number 18R104, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the acting city manager to enter into an agreement for the purchase of 1 fire apparatus and associated equipment. Item number 11, ordinance number 18S24, an ordinance by the City of Schertz, by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, amending Part 3 Schertz Code of Ordinances, the Unified Development Code, UDC, Articles 9 and 16, to amend certain site design standards for public water and wastewater facilities, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with the ordinance, providing a severability clause, and providing an effective date. Final reading. Item number 12, appointments and resignations to the various city boards, commissions, and committees. Approval of the resignation of Mr. John Carew from the Transportation Safety Advisory Commission. Ms. Sandy Kaiser from the Library Board. Approval of the appointments of Building and Standards Commission, Charles Kelm, Library Advisor Board, Cindy Vigil, appointment as regular member, and Robert Lopez, alternate member. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Carol Yauger, alternate member. Transportation Safety Advisory Commission, Charles Cornell Lease, appointment as a regular member. Fernando Hayward, alternate member, and Brandon Bristow, alternate member. Item number 13. Resolution number 18R106, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the acting city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with the Texas Department of Public Safety for the purchase or of recurring supplies and other matters in connection therewith. Those are the 13 items. Does anyone wish to pull any individual item for further discussion? Yes.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I don't want to pull anything, but I would offer that a request to include items 16, 17, and 18 on consent. I'll make a motion.
Second.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the motion.
Okay, have a motion to include items 16, 17, and 18 in with the consent agenda items. Motion made by Councilmember Davis and seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. So in order to do it, we need a vote. Is there any discussion about any others that need to be pulled over? Well, let's take care of this vote at this time.
Aye.
I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, so items 16, 17, and 18 are included amongst our consent agenda items. Item 16. Resolution number 18R103, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the acting city manager to enter into an agreement to the existing A133 agreement for the construction phase services of the construction manager at risk management for the new fire station number 3 and associated support systems and other matters in connection therewith. Item number 17 is ordinance number 18D26, An ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, providing that the City Code of Ordinances of the City of Schertz, Texas, be amended by revising sections 86-118, maximum limits in school zones, including the school zone for Rose Garden Elementary on FM 1518, and providing an effective date. First reading. And item 18, ordinance number 18D27, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, providing that the City Code of Ordinances of the City of Schertz, Texas, be amended by revising section 86-118, maximum limits in school zones, including the school zone for the Danville Middle School on FM 482 and Hubertus Road, and providing an effective date. Once again, first reading. Any of these items that anybody wishes to have pulled at this time? I'll take that as a no. Do I hear a motion to accept the...
So move.
Have a motion by Councilmember Gutierrez?
Second.
And a second by Councilmember Davis. Any discussion? Call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Ms. Dennis, did you get all the information?
I'll get it from one of the...
Okay. Moving on to discussion and action items. Item number 14 is a resolution number 18R94, consideration and approval of a resolution relating to establishing the city's intention to reimburse itself for the prior lawful expenditure of funds relating to constructing various city improvements from the proceeds of tax-exempt obligations to be issued by the city for authorized purposes, authorizing other matters incident and related thereof, and providing an effective date. Yes, sir.
Good evening,
It's
Mayor.
all yours.
The resolution you have before you is required by the state and the IRS if the city would like to make expenditures on future bonds. Basically, make the expenditure now in order to get something accomplished or get something purchased, and then issue bonds at a later date with the intention of repaying that cash advance, basically. The city has planned a refunding bond later this year, starting in October. And the city can, since they're both general obligation bonds, the city can combine those two issuances into one in order to save issuance costs. So that's when the funds are planning to arrive. However, we received a request from TxDOT for the first payment of the FM 1518 contribution the city had entered into with them for the amount that is listed in the resolution. The city does not plan to issue the full $5 million previously authorized by the voters, and then the additional $5 million, council passed a resolution stating the maximum contribution for the city would be the full $10 million. The city is planning to wait on the rest of those funds until TxDOT's ready to ask for those. The current timetable we have is about 2021, and the city does not want to issue all of that now and just sit on $10 million and wait for them to ask for it when we could be using those bond funds on other projects that help the city now and then issue them when the time is right. That's why we're splitting that issuance up. Any questions by council?
Any questions by council? No questions. There's some specific verbiage to the motion here, and as Mayor Pro Tem, I'll make the motion. I, Mayor Pro Tem Scagliolo, move to approve Resolution 18R94 to adopt a reimbursement resolution.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I'll call for the vote. Aye.
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 Aye. It's unanimous. Motion passes. Item number 15, City of Schertz and Seguin, or Schertz-Seguin Local Government Corporation refunding potential.
Good Evening. There is a refunding opportunity for some of these Schertz local government corporation bonds. The payment of those bonds is split equally 50-50 with between City of Schertz and City of Seguin. Some of the extra proceeds made by the SSLGC or Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation can offset those bond payments. But currently the city pays about $1.3 million annually for our 50% of these Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation bonds. Here to go over and brief you in a little bit more detail on the refunding opportunity, I have Andrew Friedman from SAMCO.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Andrew Friedman with Samco Capital Markets. I left in front of each of your seats a summary that was presented to the SSLGC Executive Committee last week detailing this refunding opportunity. As you'll recall from my partner Mark McCliney's presentation on the City of Schertz's refunding opportunity that we are pursuing for later this year, Schertz Seguin's refunding opportunity came about as a result of the same circumstances. Tax law changed at the end of 2017, and that eliminated any tax-exempt issuer's ability to advance refund their debt more than 90 days in front of their call date. The bonds that we're considering here for SSLGC are the Contract Revenue Bond Series 2010. They're callable beginning February 1st, 2019, meaning we can't close any sooner than November of 2018 in order to comply with the tax law. And so the timetable's been presented. The refunding would be done on a current basis. This would be matching, as we've done with any of our own refundings and SSLGC's previous refundings. We're taking an annual debt service savings, matching the final maturity of the 2010 bonds we're refunding with the new bonds. So we're not extending the maturity. We're simply replacing high interest debt with lower interest debt and taking advantage of the savings therein. The cover page here that I passed out to you details an annual savings of roughly $73,000 a year on that debt. As a 50% partner in the corporation, the city could expect to receive $37,000 a year roughly in debt service that would flow back to your utility system and eventually your rate payers, or allow opportunity for other utility system projects, which would be at the discretion of you as a council. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. The second page that I left for you is a timetable of this refunding. SSLGC is planning to take this to their board on the 16th for them to take action and determine if this is something that they wish to proceed with. Assuming that they do, they would sell the bonds on September 20th, and then the parameter sale of that has to be ratified by each of the City of Schertz and the City of Seguin. And then we would finally have pricing on November 14th, where we would actually lock in interest rates and secure that savings so long as certain thresholds are met that will be defined in that parameter order that will be back in front of you on September 25th. And so this action tonight is really getting a green light, an informal green light from you all that you do wish to pursue this as a partner in SSLGC. You're not binding yourself to pursuing the refunding. You'll have one more opportunity to do that on September 25th.
Very well. The agenda items specifically is discussion and consideration and or action of potential refunding opportunity of outstanding contract revenue bonds of the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation to achieve debt service savings for the corporation and therefore the City of Schertz. Any discussion from the council?
I have a couple of questions. So we're going to be saving about $800,000, right?
Yes, sir.
Per city.
Per city.
Question, when are we going to lock that rate again?
November, not November 14th, I apologize. That would be November 14th, yes.
So in the event of a likely rate increase by the Fed, that will affect our number?
Absolutely. There is always the possibility that between now and November, interest rates will have risen to a level that does not make this refunding worth pursuing. And so in the bond ordinance that's going to outline what those parameters are. We'll set the parameters such that if we don't generate a certain level of savings, we won't price the bonds.
So we'll have recourse at that time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if I might ask, what is the threshold that you're looking at?
I believe we're looking at 3%. Because this is a current refunding, every day you wait past that call date of February 1, 2019 in savings you cannot get. So in theory, if you can save $1 net of all costs, it's economically beneficial to move through that. We set a threshold of about 3%. Of being worthwhile in pursuing. We need to save some money, otherwise you're issuing bonds just to pay all of your lawyers and consultants, and that doesn't feel right. And so I think 3% will be that threshold. That's still to be worked out. You will have an opportunity to see that and weigh in on that along with SSLGC as that order is drafted and authorized by both cities and the SSLGC board.
So currently, we're looking at savings of $37,000.
And that's at a present value savings percentage of 5.4%.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Crawford.
I asked you a question before, more about the previous item, but on this item, the same kind of question. Do you have any idea what the approximate cost is to refinance one of these bonds, or refinance all of these bonds on this project?
Sure. The bonds that we're refunding total nearly $20 million. Cost of issuance right now, and this is an estimate that's been put in, is roughly $250,000. The total cost savings that we're projecting, that present value savings of $1,041,000, is net of those costs.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Mr. Gutierrez?
I noticed on this, the timeline, the 13th is November 13th is when you're pricing the bonds?
Yes.
Okay. Any idea when council will be given the actual rate? I don't see that on here.
You will be briefed after the fact. This will be done as a parameter bond sale. It's something that we've done each time SSLGC has issued bonds because of the sensitivity of when an issuer sells bonds into the bond market. We have to be able to authorize and sell within less than a 24-hour period because both Schertz and Seguin have to ratify that order in order to make it stand. We've sold these as parameter bond sales. They're set up such that we have to hit certain thresholds. We have to save a certain amount of money that you all as a governing body are comfortable with in order to proceed, but it's logistically not possible to sell the bonds, have SSLGC take board action, and then have the city of Schertz and Seguin take action. So we've done these parameter bond sales when it comes to SSLGC. You'll be apprised of those rates at your next meeting after we lock in rates on November 14th, assuming that they're sufficient to warrant moving forward with the refunding.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Ms. Crawford.
On the page you gave us,
yes, sir.
The gross net savings is $1.6 million, right?
Yes, sir.
And is it correct for me to say take off $250,000 for the...
No, sir, that $250,000 is already netted out of
Okay,
savings.
so the net present value is of the 1.6 then?
Yes.
Down to the 1 point...
Of that 1.608.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? Do I hear a motion to proceed with the refunding potential?
There is no action required by City Council at this time.
It says action, a potential fund. It says discussion, consideration, and/or action.
So I want to be clear, you could certainly say we're fine with that parameter bond sale tonight. What we'd indicated in the report is that we'd brief you. We'd come back on September 25th, which gives time for that to occur. Gets closer, so we kind of see what the markets are doing. And at that point, you'd say, yeah, we're good 2 weeks out. But if council's comfortable going, yeah, we understand the gist of the deal, we understand the parameters, those aren't going to change. We want to
How about a motion to that effect?
You could do that, yes, sir.
I make a motion to the effect that we have been briefed and we understand that we have been briefed about this, and we can vote yes or no about whether we understand it or not.
And what you could do is you could approve the parameter bond sale tonight. We would not come back on the 25th then to get that action going forward.
No, we would still have to be back here on September 25th because that sale is not hasn't been written yet. Gotcha.
About just a formal acknowledgement that we have been briefed. That's my motion.
Okay, would you state it one more time?
I make a motion that we vote on the acknowledgement that we have been briefed on this process.
Have a motion that we understand what the process is. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Have a motion from Mr. Crawford and a second from Councilmember Gutierrez. Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you so very much. Really do appreciate it. I understand it's getting a little bit late in the evening, so thank you. Okay, the other items have been dealt with. Next item on the agenda is a roll call vote confirmation.
Yes, the motion was made by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez to add agenda items 16, 17, and 18 to the consent agenda. Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Edwards, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Consent agenda items consisting of items 1 through 13, items 16 and 17, and 18. Motion was made by Councilmember Gutierrez, seconded by Councilmember Davis. Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Edwards, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 14, resolution number 18R94. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola, seconded by Councilmember Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Edwards, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 15, a motion was made by Councilmember Crawford that the council has been formally, they have acknowledged approval of the proceed to, that they were briefed to proceed with the potential refunding. Seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Mayor Pro Tem Scagliola, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Edwards, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a workshop. This item was requested by Mayor Carpenter and Councilmember Crawford. We could address it now, but
I think we should wait till the mayor's here.
Very, very well. Okay, the next item is a closed session. City Council will meet in closed session under Section 551074 of the Texas Government Code. Personnel matters to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, resignation, duties, discipline, or dismissal of the city manager. And item number 20, City Council will meet in closed session under Section 551087 of the Texas Government Code, deliberation regarding economic development negotiations, closed meeting. The governmental body is not required to conduct an open meeting to discuss or deliberate regarding commercial or financial information that the governing body has received from a business prospect that the governing body seeks to have locate, stay, or extend in or near the territory of the government body with which the governmental body is conducting economic development negotiations, or to deliberate the offer of financial or other incentives to a business project. And the two projects under consideration would be Project Echo 043 and Project Echo 044. Take about 5 minutes, and we'll reconvene in closed session. Okay. Reconvene into regular session. Item 19, take any action based on discussions held in closed session under agenda item 19. There's no action to be taken. And number 20, A, take any action based on discussion held in closed session under agenda item 20, and there, again, was none. Don't need a written roll call confirmation. Next on the agenda, requests and announcements. Announcements by the acting city manager. Mr. James.
Thank you. Two things to mention. One is for council. I think Dudley sent an email out earlier. There was a hearing at TCEQ on the Post Oak landfill. If anyone on council would be willing or like to go down for that hearing tomorrow, if you could touch base with Dudley before you go. Certainly, the more folks showing up offering the city's position is helpful. The second thing is we have 3 firefighters who are among, I think, about 100 from the state of Texas that are headed out to California to fight the wildfires there. The group from this area that's meeting up is, in fact, trying to get out of our Fire Station 2 right now. There were a little bit of delays loading them up, but they are headed out this evening. So we've got 3 folks from Schertz who are going to be heading out to California to work on that effort. So certainly let's keep them and everybody else in our thoughts and prayers.
Next item, request by mayor or council members that items be placed on the future city agenda. Mr. Davis?
Nothing, sir.
Councilmember Gutierrez?
No comments.
Councilmember Edwards?
I've already talked to Mr. James about this, and maybe if you could send me a private email or something of that nature.
We can't hear you.
I've already talked to Mr. James about this, but I asked for things since we were talking about the budget, programs that may be cut, actually. So there are some things that I want to definitely discuss. I don't know if we want to put it on the agenda, though. And that can be done at your
Dr. Kaiser?
I don't have anything.
Councilmember Crawford?
The item that we had for the workshop that the mayor and I had our names on.
I understand.
And how do we want to deal with the other workshop that Scott and I had our name tagged to, and Scott wasn't here?
Mr. James, what do you propose?
Let him read
Just
about
put
it.
them on the next week's agenda? That work?
We can ask him if that's what he wants to do, if you want. Save that effort.
Well, I think if we put it on the agenda, then
He can cancel it if he wants
can
to.
cancel it if they see the need. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Item 21, information available to the city council in our packages, and Mr. James, you already addressed all of those. All right, and announcements by mayor and city council members. Let's start with Councilmember Davis.
Nothing, sir.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Nothing.
Councilmember
Nothing,
Edwards.
sir.
Councilmember Kaiser.
Nothing.
And Councilmember Crawford.
Nothing.
Okay, I'll go along with the consensus there. There being no further business, we don't need a motion to adjourn. Let's just have a nice evening.